Excellent. I think it's still us as the speakers for now. It's very difficult. I don't know, we're seeing people filter in. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, from wherever you're joining us. My name is Malik Dasu. I am a program officer at the African Climate Foundation and supporting the coordination of the African Food Systems Transformation Collective. Thank you for joining us in what is our third webinar in this series. We are going to give it a couple minutes while people filter in, so just bear with us. For any questions that you have, please direct them to the Q&A box and not the chat box. It's just easier for us to track and respond to them when they come out. Great, so we're going to give it a couple minutes while people join, and then we'll do the formal introductions. Great, I'm seeing a lot more people filter in. So I think let's get started. Welcome everyone again. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us. This is the third webinar of the African Food Systems Transformation Collective. It's our series on trying to socialize recommendations for deep, just food systems transformation. Sorry, I'm going to just mute someone on my side. Okay. Yes, this is the third in our series. This one's going to be focusing on food production. So we've dealt with other parts of the value chain and the cross-cutting themes such as governance that surround food systems transformation. But in some ways, this is where the rubber hits the road. And we're very privileged to be joined by experts from different sectors of the different production chains. Our first speaker will be on the catalytic potential of Africa's livestock sector. And we won't, unfortunately, be joined by Angela Coetzee, but we've got Steph Swanepoel, who will be stepping in to her place today. We'll then follow that up with how to accelerate silvopastoral systems in Africa, and that'll be presented by Elizabeth Jeiyol. Following that, we'll be speaking to agrochemicals in food production and processing. Freeman Elujulo will be presenting on that. The fourth presentation will be on transitions to sustainable, resilient, and equitable fisheries and aquaculture, something often overlooked in food systems discussion, and that'll be presented by Maureen Cheserek. And then the last to close us off will be on extension and advisory services for agroecological transitions in Africa. And closing us there will be Opeyemi Elujulo. Following that, I'll pass over to my colleague Florian, who I'll ask to just introduce himself in a moment, who'll take us through our advisory committee members' reflections on what's being presented today. And joining us from the advisory committee is Tabara Ndiaye from the Agroecology Fund. We're very privileged to be joined by her, and Salome Awunda. Sorry about that, Salome. And also Andrew Adem. Yeah, I think that's all by way of introductions. Just a reminder again, if you do have any questions, try and raise them in the Q&A. We'll try get those attended to. Okay, so with that, Steph, could I hand over to you for our first presentation?
Thanks so much, Malik. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stephanie Swanepoel, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to share the findings and recommendations that came from our research into the catalytic potential of Africa's sustainable livestock sector. Our team undertook this work through a desktop review of both academic and grey literature, drawing on reports, case studies, and briefs generated by civil society organizations that work in this space. Africa's pastoralist and smallholder livestock sector is one of the most overlooked yet high potential areas for transforming food systems, livelihoods, and ecological resilience. Strategic funding into this sector can unlock enormous social, environmental, and economic returns. Why? Africa is home to 85% of the world's livestock keepers. For 350 million people, livestock are not just food, they're income, wealth, transport, soil fertility, and resilience in the face of crisis. Pastoralists and smallholders already provide 75% of Africa's milk and more than half its meat. This is the foundation of nutrition for children in their first 1,000 days and a backbone of rural economies where up to 55% of household income comes from livestock. It's not just at the community level. Africa's livestock sector contributes between 30 to up to 80% in some countries of GDP related to agriculture. That's an average of 35% a country. Yet despite this importance, funding flows to the livestock sector are negligible. Only 0.57%, for example, of Africa's climate finance reaches this sector. Most external investments are still going to industrial models that marginalize local producers and degrade the environment. There is a risk if we do nothing. Demand for livestock products is expected to triple or quadruple in the coming decades. Without deliberate, strategic, and sustainable investment, that demand will be met by industrial feedlots and imports with devastating and known consequences: deforestation, biodiversity loss, antibiotic resistance, water contamination, and the collapse of traditional livelihoods. Africa will be further locked into a food system that harms people and the planet, instead of harnessing the regenerative potential of the systems that already exist. This is where philanthropic capital and sustainable investment is uniquely powerful. Unlike commercial finance, it can take the long view, support innovation, and work across the system. Our research identified 4 key areas for investment. The first was investment into production, specifically into animal health and disease prevention, where community-based veterinary services, vaccines, and local health systems can prevent catastrophic herd losses, protect nutrition, and reduce the spread of zoonotic diseases. The second production element was investment into rangeland management and water systems, investing into rotational grazing systems, ecosystem restoration, and water harvesting can help to rebuild soil fertility, store carbon, and secure livelihoods in the face of climate shocks. Investment into water harvesting, storage, and conservation, as we know, has multiplier effects. It also supports enhanced food production, nutrition, livelihoods, and so on. Our second bucket that was identified was investments into appropriate and enabling governance systems, specifically investments into policy work to ensure that policies support equitable, inclusive, and sustainable livestock production. And secondly, into supporting participatory governance systems, which have been successful in Africa, especially those that give pastoralists and women a voice. to help build sustainable and contextual solutions. The third area that we identified was investments into market access aligned with agroecology. Smallholders and pastoralists need fair and transparent routes to market that value ecological stewardship, such as participatory guarantee schemes, mobile auctions, and infrastructure like cold storage. This is not theoretical. Case studies like Meat Naturally in South Africa show how a modest intervention can connect farmers to markets, restore rangelands, and deliver more than $1 million in new income in a single year. Our fourth and last bucket for investment was investment into research. And this includes specifically research into adaptive breeds, local and indigenous livestock breeds, following agroecological principles of participation that acknowledge local knowledge and that help build a strong local base that can support a sustainability transition. A further area for research was into alternative feed options to support livestock during dry seasons, and particularly in a time of climate change. There's a significant return on investment. The African Union has estimated that for every $1 invested in primary livestock production, it will yield $2.90. Every dollar invested in value addition yields $5.90. These are hard numbers. We mustn't forget that behind them are the lives of families who can keep children in school, withstand droughts, and feed their communities nutritiously. Funding into sustainable livestock keeping also carries an element of climate justice. Africa's smallholder systems are low input, contributing just 1.2% of global emissions, yet are the ones most exposed to climate shocks. Supporting them is not just effective, it is fair. The sustainable African livestock sector provides a rare opportunity for investment to simultaneously reduce poverty, improve nutrition, restore ecosystems, and build resilience to climate change. Investment in this sector means backing a transition that is already underway, supporting people and systems that are proven, resilient, and deeply rooted in the continent's future. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Steph. Yeah, a really, as you said, overlooked sector, but a really critical one for the nutrition needs of the continent, but also the economic development needs, and one that's particularly susceptible to the impacts of climate change, and adaptation responses, which are not being looked at adequately. And I think you put forward a very cogent and sound case for the investments. I think the job for everyone in the audience listening of our advisory committee is to then scrutinize which aspects of those four buckets make sense and where in the investment philanthropy should come in. Where does grant funding make the most sense to catalyze those investments? So be on the lookout for those responses. And just on that note, I see we've been joined by Nancy Rapondo and Lola Shuperin, who are also part of our advisory committee. So welcome to you. We are going to move to the next presentation now. And Freeman, if you don't mind, we're going to pass over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Malik. So our work actually looked at agrochemicals in food production and processing. And this work was carried out by myself, Nelson Edume, Vance Minash, Rabanabari Theophilus, Dos Rakat, and Elujulo Opeyemi. So what we did, we looked at agrochemical use and misuse in Africa food production and processing, and realized that they are on the increase. And the issue brief tried to look at some of the reasons why agrochemical use are high, and we identified some key points: climate change, and also the human population growth increases in the continent, And also we realize that there are high level of food insecurity in the region, and there are quests to see how food is available on the table, like a popular African saying that a hungry man is an angry person. So in the course of that, there are initiatives like the Green Revolution to ensure that there's food on the table. So what this issue brief looked at is we didn't just speak, we also looked at how agrochemicals may have contributed to security, but at the greater expense to health, and also looking at environmental health. So we weigh it through literature reviews and also what is happening on the ground. So the brief is look at how best we can turn the African food system to reduce reliance on synthetic chemicals and to promote inputs that protect human health, that are environmentally friendly, at the same time they are sustainable. So now, if we look at Africa, the concern of agrochemical use are issues of abuses, lack of awareness. So we also presented scenarios in different aspects in Kenya, Ghana, Uganda, how people are just using agrochemicals without protective equipment, or also abusing it in terms of access. So, and we also identified that philanthropics are driving this expansion, and some of the huge implication for human ecosystem health is something we cannot really undermine. So it's actually a 50-page document that gave a good summary on how best we can look at safer food and promote agroecology. For example, in we saw that in South Africa alone, we have 300 registered pesticide products in South Africa, because these agrochemicals, they come in different forms. One, they come as fertilizer, they come as pesticides, and also they come as food additives for coloring, you know. So some of the things we saw. So in South Africa, 300 registered pesticide alone, and this is where we find the highest in the continent. So, and we looked at some of the use of this chemical to drive increases in pest, then also diversity of weeds. So we are looking at it in a climatic condition now, that is climate change, which is the basis of why people are saying, okay, climate is changing. But the scenario we saw on our issue brief is that Africa do not have real problems of either land or fertile land. We have vast land areas, but actually we have naturally developed it. So we cannot be towing the direction of the West, that maybe they have limited land and also chemical. And in Africa, for example, we have concerns of unsafe handling. And also in Africa, we do not have proper labeling of products. So if you look at the concerns of monitoring, we cannot. So we found that in farm fish in Nigeria, sodium triphosphate was seen in farm fish. Then organochlorine pesticides that contains endosulfan and dichlorophenol acetate, you know, were largely that have been largely implicated in endocrine description, which are health challenges causing kidney, liver challenges. We saw some of them reported in food and water in South Africa and also in Nigeria and other places. So Africa has a very high vulnerability to this. So we cannot base our argument on climate change, human population growth, and effort to address insecurity and hunger to say we want to support the green Africa Green Revolution that is advanced by powerful and large corporations and supported by philanthropics. So in this work, we are seeing that some of the hurdles, and this is where philanthropists have to do a lot, the dominance of the African system by large corporations is a huge concern. And some of these large corporations are financed by philanthropic organizations. And this organization prioritize profit over safe food, the human and health right, or in terms of security. So we said, no, it is high time in our recommendation to start looking at strengthening the governance environment. Like most activity, although in Africa, countries have their level of monitoring, and some countries may have gone far, but Africa is still not. For example, there are foods produced elsewhere, they are well labeled, but in Africa, we do not have label of such. In Nigeria recently, there are support for maybe genetic food, and they are not labeling such food so that you can know what you consume. So we said we need to strengthen the governance environment in an inclusive way at all scale, at all scale. So from the local level to the high level, international level, which is local, subnational, and national. We have also said we want to coordinate, mobilize, and support investment in agroecology, because we have found that agroecology is the safest direction we all need to go. Then we need to strengthen education and awareness. Most of these farmers, including the small-scale farmers, we discover, for example, we identified death in Burundi, Kenya, Ghana. So these are just cases of report. We know they are happening elsewhere. They are using it because their education and knowledge is very, very poor. They also said we need to incentivize agroecology and also other safe means to ensure that agroecology is the main practice. So, and we also said we provided case studies across Africa. So in all, we summarize that agroecological use is the direction, the principle, which are 23. If we promote agroecology, we'll be safe in Africa. Then agrochemical use is not in the direction of Africa, and Africa needs to go to more indigenous way. And agroecology is the future, and we need to eat safe. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Freeman. I think two things that stood out to me from that was, one, the emphasis on the political economy of agrochemicals and how they embed themselves in our food systems. You know, they've got very sophisticated channels of making their way to governments, influencing global policy, and making ourselves dependent on them. And I think one thing to stress from there is the need for food sovereignty by, you know, limiting our exposure to them. I think the second, which is probably a question to Tabara to think about when she comes in on hers from the Agroecology Fund, which supports a lot of this education work, is how we do that exactly as philanthropies. There are a lot of them who work on these agroecological education systems, but the effectiveness and efficacy of how we do it, I think, still leaves questions for us to answer. So thanks for that, Freeman. I think let me move on to the next one, which is on transitions to sustainable, resilient, and equitable fisheries and aquaculture. One that I'm very excited to hear about again. Maureen, could I pass to you?
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Maureen Cheserek, and I'm going to let me turn on the video. Yeah, so I'm going to share or present our issue brief. This issue brief is focused on 3 countries. We have Kenya, Uganda, and Nigeria. And I'm going to highlight some of the current situation in the 3 countries. I'm going to also present what are the problems in the fisheries and aquaculture sector. I'm going to also propose some solutions and also areas where philanthropists can support. So what is the current context in the fisheries and aquaculture sector? You find that in Africa, currently, we have rising problems to do with hunger. We have malnutrition, and when we talk about malnutrition, we talk about micronutrient deficiencies. We have issues to do with stunting among our children under 5. We have issues to do with overweight and obesity. And what we are saying is that fish is a very nutritious food, and it is affordable protein. So if we can start focusing on our fisheries sector and also our aquaculture sector, we are going to feed many millions. However, what is happening now, but right now you find that in Africa, we are importing fish. We are importing fish, and we have the ability to even produce our own fish. And again, and what is happening now again in Africa is that up to 30% of our fish, as much as we are producing our fish, we are losing through post-harvest losses. About 30% is lost through post-harvest losses and wastes. Again, you find that in our region, Africa, we're spending about USD 6 billion per year to import this fish. And something else that we noted in our research is that women and youth are also locked out of these opportunities to benefit from the two sectors. And we believe that philanthropists can really help us unlock this potential and enable us to even benefit from these sectors. So what are the main problems in the fisheries and aquaculture sector? So number one is that Africa produces, I think, about 6% of the global fish, despite having the water resources. We have the ecosystem, we have our lakes, we have our rivers, we have our coastlines, but we are only producing 6% of this global fish, meaning that we really have the potential to produce even more. Number two is what I had said earlier, is the post-harvest losses, yeah? We're losing a lot of our fish, meaning that we really need to really think about us investing in the cold storage or even modern processing technologies. Another problem is that there is that low adoption of technologies. For us researchers, we've come up with so many technologies related to increasing production of fish. And for instance, like the, how do we call it? The aquaponics, yeah, where we are integrating the poultry and fish, or agriculture and fish. We have the technologies, but we do not have adequate funds to support scale up. Another gap that we find in this sector is to do skills gaps. Yeah, our value chain actors also do not have adequate skills to be able to, say, for instance, to process or even to know the technologies, how to increase their production. They even also have skills to, they also have issues to do the digital tools, technology, applications, all these, or even tracing, yeah. So those are some of the problems that we think are facing the sector. Oh, I'm forgetting about the environmental risks, yeah. Poor waste management is also giving us problems in the sector. So what are the solutions? So in our issue brief, we've highlighted 6 main solutions. Of course, there are so many solutions, but number one solution that we are proposing is that we can invest in modern aquaculture technology, for instance, when it comes to aquaculture. And in this case, for us to enhance production, we need to think about supporting our farmers to adopt these low-cost technologies. Like for instance, the aquaponic system I talked about earlier. We have the integrated fish poultry culture systems and many others. And another solution is about feeds. Yeah, you find that our fish farmers are having, they're not able to afford the current fish meals. So what we are saying is that if we are able to support our farmers to even, we increase the farming of the black soldier fly. It's cheap and it's affordable. And I think if philanthropists can also fund us around here, I think we will go a long way in increasing production of fish in Africa. That is for increasing production and many others. Number two is we also, another solution is about us reducing post-harvest losses. We can see we're losing a lot of our fish from the landing sites and even up to the table. So what we are saying that to reduce post-harvest losses, what we can focus in is a fund. In the cases where we can scale up the solar-powered cold storage. And also we can also invest in these energy-saving efficient dryers, for instance, or even the smoking kilns for the farmers. So I think if we fund this area also, we are going to reduce these post-harvest losses. And at the same time, we are saying at the local communities, in our local communities, we can also set up community-run processing hubs so that our farmers can be able to preserve their fish. When they harvest their fish, they can start preserving them from there, even before distributing them in the markets. And by doing so, also we should be able to create jobs for the youth, for the women, and even for the men at the local level. Another investment area is us now for equity. We need to invest in our men and women, the women and the youth. And how can we do this? We can do this by providing small loans. We can provide subsidies, and especially in the area of feed. We say the feeds are very expensive. and even giving them small grants so that they can be able to really enter into this value chain comfortably like everybody else. And we can also support them with regard to like funding cooperatives so that they can be able to form their own cooperative societies, and even have business incubation, that is business incubators. And what we are saying is that these incubations can be inclusive. We ensure that they're more inclusive. So what we're saying, let's invest in our women and also in our youth. Number 4 solution is for us to build skills. We saw the gap, the skills gap and training. And in our issue brief, we're saying that what philanthropists can do is that we can they can support us so that we can establish these skills lab hubs in the areas where we have our fisheries and also the aquaculture happening. And in this case, or we establish community centers where we can have small centers where now we can be able to be the researchers or other community resource persons can have their spaces to train our fishermen so that we can, like for instance, training them on sustainable fish farming. We can be training them on value addition. We can also train them on food safety and many other topics. So if we can establish these skills hubs, I believe we are going to transition our fisheries sector and also aquaculture sector. Number 4 solution is we also propose that we leverage on digital technologies. That is applications, smart sensors, satellite tracking. We can have digital platforms for marketing, for instance, so that so that our farmers, fish farmers, can benefit more through us cutting out the middlemen. They benefit so much, especially when it comes from marketing. They benefit a lot. So we want to, if you can have digital platforms where our farmers can know the best markets for their fish, or even we can cut out on the illegal fishing. Yeah, for the fishery sector, we can cut out on that and even improve traceability. So let's support leveraging on digital technologies in the fisheries and also the aquaculture sector. Lastly, on consumption, the part on nutrition now. We really need to also invest in promoting fish consumption. And how do we do that? We can invest in supporting public campaigns. For example, Eat More Fish campaign, so that we promote. There are communities who are not consuming fish in Kenya, in Uganda, and in Nigeria. So in that case, we want to promote that maybe through raising public awareness and even doing nutrition education. And for those cultures who are not consuming fish currently, we can also organize for nutrition, social behavior change communication. So those are the solutions. So what can our philanthropists do? Where are these investment areas? So what I'm saying is that the philanthropists can really play a key role in now supporting practical, inclusive, and also sustainable projects. So being a researcher, these are some of the areas I would really ask them to fund. Number 1 is that they can fund these integrated systems like the aquaponics and aquaponics, especially number 1, so that we increase production. And when we increase production of fish, then of course it will mean that we're also going to improve consumption of fish in the local communities. Number 2 area of investment is that aspect of post-harvest losses. So I would want the philanthropists to fund cold storage and drying in Africa. And I believe if we do that, we're going to reduce spoilage even up to 50%. So that is number 2. And then number 3, I would want the philanthropists to fund us around the fish feed and especially invest in the black soldier fly. Yeah, so if we can fund or put investment around the black soldier fly farming, I believe we can cut feeds up to even $200 per ton, as compared to the what we are doing now, the fish meals what we're using now. Number 3 is the training. We said we have skills gaps. So if we can invest in training and cooperatives, I believe we will have more than 200,000 people gaining new skills and ways of doing, or even creating more jobs for people who will be working in these community centers. And number 5 is, I think I can stop there. What about now? What happens if we fund this? If we get money to support all this, in 5 years, we believe that as a team, we believe that we will have about 40% of our farmers using sustainable fish farming methods, We're going to lower feed costs. We're going to reduce imports. We're going to improve on our nutrition for women and children. We're going to even have more women. We talked about inclusivity. So we're going to have more women and youth participating in these two sectors. So my call is that let's build this sustainable blue economy together. And I believe the philanthropists can turn these transitions that we are providing into reality. And so please join us. Please join us in the fisheries and aquaculture sector to make this sector more sustainable, more resilient, and more inclusive. And if we do this, we are going to feed more people. We're going to reduce imports. We are going to create more jobs. We are going to protect the planet, and we are going to empower communities, and we are going to transform lives. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Maureen. I think yeah, you've made the case for the importance of our fisheries and agriculture sector quite clearly. I think on the recommendations, and maybe this is a prompt to our advisory committee to think about, is on those recommendations, is the case for philanthropic investment made clearly? So, for example, on investing in infrastructure development for cold chain storage or value addition to those crops, to those commodities. What's the role of philanthropy in supporting infrastructure development? Typically, that would be left to government and multilateral funders, or even in some cases the private sector, but very rarely is it left to philanthropy. So a question to follow up on that, and then also for the market linkages, for the training and development, what's the role of universities, training colleges, and the like, as well as the private sector, and where does the philanthropic sector play a catalytic role in supporting those recommendations? Maybe a prompt to our advisory committee to think about it and ask later on. But thank you very much, Maureen. I think let me move on to our second last, which is on extension and advisory services for agroecological transitions in Africa. Opeyemi, we're going to pass on to you.
Thank you so much, Malik. And hi again, everyone. Good to be here with you all. So my name is Opeyemi, Elujulo, and I'll be speaking to the work we did around the role of extension and advisory services in scaling agroecology, food systems transformation in Africa. And this work was done by myself and Elina Shilombuleni, and of course, Zach Ahmed. Freeman gave a good justification as touching the current social and ecological impact of the conventional way of doing food and farming, and why that needs to be transitioned, why that needs to be transformed. And of course, we know that, sorry, just a minute. Of course, he also gave a justification as touching why agroecology offers immense potential to transform food systems and why we should look in that direction. And Maureen just also speaking to how work also emphasize the skill gap in terms of transforming and scaling sustainable fisheries in securing the future of African food. Going back to sustainably transforming and transitioning the food systems, we know that agroecology offers valuable contribution towards transformation, the transformation efforts needed to restore and protect the essential natural conditions for food production, and of course, securing the future of African food and protecting the water resources, the soil health, and biodiversity through the promises and what agroecology practices offers. But we know that realizing the full potential of agroecology actually hinges on the development and dissemination of relevant skills that allows for best practices that agroecology offers to be adopted among farmers who produce the food, particularly smallest farmers who feed the teeming population of Africa. And this is where the extension and advisory services come to play. Over the years, we've seen focus on the conventional ways of doing things, because the existing extension and advisory service providers, I mean, it's what they have that then they can offer to the farmers, and that's what the farmers also take. And that's why we are seeing growing adoption of conventional ways of doing food and farming. And of course, we see the implication on climate change and biodiversity and the degradation of our land as well. So while extension and advisory service providers are able to help scale up agroecology, there are also some hurdles that they face, which is why we've not seen growing adoption of agroecology among farmers, despite the promises and the possibilities it offers, not just to secure the future of our food, but also to align food security efforts with landscape restoration, climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts, and of course, biodiversity conservation efforts. So our work actually identified some hurdles that effective extension and advisory service providers face in terms of scaling sustainability in Africa's food systems. And one of the others we identified was the generally low extension and advisory service providers in Africa. In some countries in Africa, like Nigeria, for one, we've seen instances of the ratio of extension service provider to farmers being 1 to 5,000 farmers. And in Kenya, we've seen the ratio around 1 to around 1,500 farmers, which makes it impossible, which makes it challenging for best practices that agroecology offers to be localized and adopted among farming communities. The other hurdle we also identified was the male-dominated extension and advisory service providers, where we have majority of the food producers being women. And of course, the power imbalance makes it challenging for best practices of agroecology to also be localized among smallholder farmers. We've also seen in terms of funding, we've seen a lot of funding going into short-term projects, which limits long-term impact. We know that agroecology takes time, but short-term funding limits what can be done. I mean, limits the interest of farmers in terms of adopting these best practices when the funding is not there. We know that agroecology can be costly when starting out, and if the support is not there in terms of funding, then that sort of discourages farmers in terms of adopting best practices of agroecology. And of course, we've also seen that in terms of developing what's it called? There's a limited engagement of farmers and grassroots communities who are connected to the local farmers. When we've seen their limited engagements when developing proposals and concept notes dialogues, calls for funding of initiatives to be supported. And of course, we've also seen, we also identified institutional and policy bias. We've seen governments of Africa largely focusing on the supporting industrial food system, the productionist narrative, and that in most cases it's usually backed by driven by the donor priorities in terms of the funding that they are giving them. So donor-driven funding priorities, the government would want to align their policies and all that. And when the funding being given to them is to scale the conventional ways of doing things, scale increased use of agrochemicals, scale increased use of GMOs, just like in the case of Green Revolution that Freeman also mentioned earlier. We've seen that government tend to align their policies and their priorities to dance to the tune of donors, just to ensure that they keep getting the money from them. So we know that repurposing this funding to support agroecology can help scale the transformation of Africa's food system and also align it to the two rural conventions as well. And again, also tying to the knowledge gap, we've also seen situations where funding funding priorities support capacity building of extension and advisory service providers in the conventional ways of doing things, but realigning funding to scale agroecology-focused extension and advisory services would also help the adoption of agroecology among smallholder farmers in Africa, and of course, securing the future of African food. So a number of recommendations that we highlighted was increased financial support for training, research, and community engagement that brings together agroecology-focused extension and advisory service providers with farming communities. When they are funding, targeted funding that supports their training with requisite agroecology skills guided by the 13 principles and the 10 elements. When their capacities are built and funding allows for that, then they are able to localize it among farmers, and of course, scaling adoption for food systems transformation. We also realized in terms of funding supporting short-term projects, but ensuring that, and this is again where the philanthropy comes in, ensuring that funding allows for long-term multi-year projects that support systemic interventions among farming community, can also help scale up the adoption of agroecology rather than funding isolated interventions that either supports biodiversity conservation or one that supports climate adaptation or landscape restoration. And inclusive targeted funding approach with scale adoption of agroecology to ensure that funding prioritizes systemic intervention rather than isolated short-term interventions. And of course, support going into monitoring and evaluation that reviews the successes, the achievements, and then the lapses of the previous funding cycle to help map, okay, where do we need to focus more funding in terms of scaling agroecology adoption, would also help to support smallholders' adoption of agroecology. I think I will stop there in the interest of time. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Opeyemi. Yeah, I think you've made the case clear for why extension services are so needed in this agroecological transition. You've also put forward the double burden on one, just the lack of extension services that are offered to farmers, but the second is what content is provided to them, what sort of agriculture is being advised by these extension officers and programs. And I think that's where you're claiming philanthropic support comes in very handy. In addition to that, on the difference between short-term project-based and more long-term systemic funding for these things. So yeah, maybe another prompt to our advisory committee to just think about, in your experience with advisory programs, where you feel philanthropic support falls short, where it needs to be improved, and how, on reflection from Opeyemi's points. I think we are still missing Elizabeth. I don't think she's joined us yet. So I think, Florian, could I pass to you? Maybe you'd like to introduce yourself first. Sorry for not doing that at the start. And then you can take us through the advisory committee reflections.
Great. Thanks, Malik. Yeah, my name is Flo. I'm with the DSTI NRF Center of Excellence in Food Security at the University of the Western Cape, and have helped to convene and coordinate the AFSTC, the African Food Systems Transformation Collective. And as part of that work, I've had the amazing privilege of getting to know a really powerful network of researchers, more than 70 researchers across Africa, and also the members of our advisory committee, 11 thought leaders and activists in the food systems transformation space, all people who have hands-on experience and personal experience of agroecology as a movement, as a science, as a philosophy, but also who are scholars in their own right and have deep understanding, both book knowledge and hand knowledge, work knowledge of food systems in Africa. And so we've asked our advisory committee members to listen to the issue brief presentations and also, of course, to read the issue briefs. And they've been also playing a major role in reviewing the issue briefs to ensure that they address all the real world concerns. So it's, you know, to manage the risk that as academics, sometimes we drift off into our own scholarly obsessions and lose touch with the ground reality. And so they've really done an amazing job in in reviewing and enhancing these issue briefs with their commentary. And so we've also asked them to reflect in this webinar on what we've heard and to offer us brief feedback based on that. So I'd like to invite the representatives of the advisory committee that we've brought together here to offer some reflections now. And I'd like to begin with Tabara and Jeiyol. If you would introduce yourself and then perhaps just give us your impressions of what you've heard thus far. Thanks, Tabara.
Thank you, Flo. Hi, everyone. I hope that you can hear me. This webinar is so timely because I'm based in Dakar, Senegal, and now we have this week we are hosting the Africa Food Systems Forum, like yesterday, since Monday, talking about Africa food systems. So, and it's really amazing to see how agroecology is pushing really to be part of the conversation. And for me, it's very, very important. And the work we did with the issue briefs and also I was in particular interested into the recommendations to philanthropies. I have over 20 years of experience working with philanthropies on agroecology in the continent. And for me, it's important to have recommendations from this set of experts from all over the continent. And when I look at mostly the recommendations, I think that they are echoing what we know that we are seeing on the ground in terms of really philanthropy to support transition, promotion to this transition. And for me, it's like my reflection started with policy. And because I think that as a philanthropy, it's important that we support organizations doing agroecology, not only agriculture per se, but fisheries, pastoralism are very, very important in this process. And really to make sure that policies are in place. And even in the process of developing policies also, that we support agroecology movements and initiatives to have the capacities really to be part of the conversations. Otherwise, what we are seeing here that we are also denouncing is the fact that even in the way agroecology strategies are developed at all levels, national and local level, sometimes agroecology practitioners are not included in the conversation. For me, it's very, very important. And also, when it comes to support to like institutions is very, very important. We are talking about movement building, but also capacity building for support for agroecology organizations is very important. And what we do mostly, because I'm now working with the Agroecology Fund, I was an advisor for many years, but now the coordinator of agroecology regional funds in the continent. We think that like doing long-term support is very, very important. Not someone was saying that agroecology takes time. So it's important that as a funder, we really are committed into doing long-term, but also deep support to the movements. And also, I think that also one important recommendation I had is internal reflection, so that agroecology movements can reflect on their own priorities, depending on where they sit, but also what are the priorities of their environment. Another important thing also we were reflecting these past days and also through the issue briefs is the need really for the agroecology movements to capture resources available in their environment. It can be from public budgets, because the government budgets are also have to be available for everyone. from the communities. That's very important. And also private sector. Advocacy is very important, and it's important that the voice of producers is loud enough to make the choice clear to private sector, but also corporations. Corporations are more and more involved into agriculture, agroecology in the region. And it's important that we support our partners in the region in terms. I saw that into the recommendations. Education and capacity building, as I said, is very, very important. And supporting training centers at the community level is important, both for fisheries, pastoralism, but also agriculture is very, very important. And we know that there are a lot of conflicts in the areas in Africa. And when you support agroecology for philanthropists, it's important to support also conflict management mechanisms in the region, and that are very, very important. And what we think also is important is, besides supporting agroecology initiatives, it's important also to make sure that we create learning spaces that where agroecology actors can share experiences, but also can support each other in terms of developing and also monitoring their own progress. We talked about monitoring and evaluation, but it has also to be learning support for these among the recommendations. So the development of infrastructure also is very important for organizations, but also at community level, to show the importance of, we've heard about the issue briefs on fisheries. That's very, very important, that there is kind of mechanism, but also infrastructure at the very local level to show importance of fisheries. And also another important thing, I think, is the expansion of access to renewable energy sources. That's very, very important. And from these meetings this week and last week, we've seen a lot of interest to innovation. If there is innovation, support scaling up of innovations. Good innovations are happening, but it's important that they are supported. So these are things that we are trying to do. And another thing I think that is important also in terms of what I have learned from the recommendations to philanthropies is the important work for philanthropists already in the field of agroecology to do advocacy for other funders to join the movement and be part of the support to agroecology and sustainable agriculture in the region. So that's what I had to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tabara. I think you've put your finger on a bunch of really important issues there. And I've taken some notes, but I've obviously not been able to record all of what you've said now. But some of the things that stuck to me is what you mentioned around the importance of including practitioners in governance processes, and to enhance the capacity for internal reflection within the movement, and for learning to take place. And I'll ask the subsequent panelists to respond to some of that, because I think that they also have views on that. But I was also particularly struck with what you said about conflict management. And I just want to flag that one of our issue brief presenters, Elizabeth Jeiyol, unfortunately was not able to join us today. I think she may have had delays in transit. But the issue brief that they worked on was around silvopastoralism, which really tries to put forward new ways of basically enabling pastoralist community and cropping communities to coexist in the same environments through particular approaches of range management and of planting of trees and so forth. So that issue brief is really interesting. And one of the real important issues there is that agroecology also, because of its social aspects and because of its way of working in an integrated way with landscapes and ecosystems, really has a lot of potential to diffuse and resolve conflict around resource use. So I'm really grateful that you brought that up. And I do invite the listeners to have a look at that issue brief on silvopastoralism. But with reference to what you said around inclusion of practitioners and internal reflection of agroecology movement, I'd like to invite as our next panelist, Andrew Adem. Andrew, are you still on the call? It seems like Andrew may have dropped off the call. He may return later. So then I'm going to move forward and ask Lolasho, who is also a representative of communities that are closely involved with pastoralism and is an up-and-coming youth in this space, to perhaps offer us some of his reflections. Lolasho.
Thank you very much, Flo, and good afternoon, members and participants of this webinar. My name is Bernard Lolasho Karen. I am from Laikipia in Kenya. I'm a pastoralist and I work with the Kenya Indigenous Youth Network. So firstly, as I was going through the comments and the questions, I see someone asking what's the relevance of all these documents really. And it's important to note that most oftenly we say that we do not have enough research into indigenous people's advocacy, and also in Africa, and especially in the food systems transformation initiatives. And this essentially is what the issue groups are trying to look at. Therefore, I would say it's been a privilege to work with the team, the researchers, and also in my capacity as a practitioner and also a young activist when it comes to food systems transformation. Most importantly, I was working on the livestock, the catalytic sector of the livestock systems, and I noted that the recommendations were very important, as it highlighted very important things, especially pastoralist and nomadic lifestyles, and the recommendations were very specific with having mobile auctions, and these are very practical initiatives that the philanthropic sector can also support, because oftenly we realize and see that systems such as pastoralists are dependent on rain-fed systems, for example, and therefore pastoralists would move from place to place. And therefore, having mobile auctions, for example, supporting market systems like that, PGS amongst pastoralists is also a very important thing that helps bridge the gap. Also, because the pastoralist sector and the livestock sector in Africa is very important. It's part of the economies. So it's not just a form of livelihood and a sort of cultural identity, but also it has a very important economic aspect. Therefore, and reflecting as well on issues such as the conflict that's there in the silvopastoralisms. These initiatives and the reflections that I have as a member of the advisory committee is that these are important initiatives that we have to reflect on to guide not just the philanthropic sector, but also academia. And it's about time, and I'm proud that this has happened at this time, that we Africans write our story in how best we understand it, and having to examine the realities that we have and how our communities are living, and putting it down in issue briefs helps guide our story and how we would want these interventions to be intervened on. So I would want to say that these are very important reflections, and this is a moment of pride for us as practitioners and activists in the space, to see that we have documents and referrals and advocacy documents, I would say, that help us to amplify our story and that of our peoples in food systems transformation. So thank you very much, Flo.
Great. Thank you, Lolasho. And I really appreciate what you're saying around it being time for Africans to tell their own stories. And indeed, I think part of what these issue briefs are aiming to do is to help shift the narrative and to demonstrate to philanthropies that there is, in fact, a wealth of evidence already. And not only is there a wealth of evidence, but there is also a huge capacity amongst researchers within Africa to generate the kinds of evidence that is needed for agroecological approaches to gain more legitimacy, more credibility, more relevance, and to begin to influence not just the philanthropic narratives, but also the narratives at the policy space. And the narratives also amongst those people involved in the actual food system as food systems workers throughout, to recognize that sustainable and indigenous approaches, in fact, are based on very deep-rooted knowledge. So that's really valuable. Thanks for putting that out there so clearly for us. And I'd like to invite now another representative of our advisory committee, who in one of the very first engagements spoke about landscape scale engagement. And I thought that was such an interesting intervention to make, and it stuck with me. So Nancy, are you still on the call? Nancy Rapando?
Yes, I am.
Ah, there we go. Please go ahead.
Okay, I'm trying to put my video on. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I have been keenly listening in, and let me just talk about issues around livestock, because that also resonates very well with the belief I have for landscape aspects before I talk more about the agroecology transition that is happening in Africa. Yes, what happens mostly with livestock, and just to resonate with the question from my friend Jafet Muli, is that livestock within the discussions, within funding discussions, has been seen in terms of a greenhouse gas emitter. And when we are talking about this, we need to be also critical on which type of livestock are we talking about, because within the African system, where most of the livestock is within pastoral systems, are we having that intense level of emissions? So making sure, ensuring that most of the funding to livestock is actually tied to ensuring greenhouse gas emission reduction is a bit unfair for our livestock sector, because we know very well that our pastoral systems are really threatened in terms of conflicts, the shrinking land sizes, the invasive species are becoming another challenge within our landscapes, and this makes livestock production become so hard. And who are taking care of livestock every time, not looking at the social big problem. Our livestock systems also have very unique governance systems, because some of them are within what we can call conservancy systems in Kenya, where the grazing areas need to be well demarcated so that we get enough space for grazing. So that tells you that the discussion around livestock should not be limited to emission reduction, but we need to address the critical threats in the sector that are also climate related, because there are also issues around land degradation, conflicts that really need to be taken care of. And also, I want to agree with our presenter on livestock is that most of the time when we go to the markets, the person who sets the prices is the owner of the commodity. But livestock is one that the person who dictates the price is always the person taking it, the buyer. So we see how those markets are poorly structured, and that is why the economic benefits within livestock are not so high. And the need to actually look at livestock from more of a multifaceted approach, looking at how does it enable livelihoods, how is it also creating economies, and how is it also creating social systems? So I really wanted to speak about that in terms of livestock, but also just to say that I know there was something to be talked about silvopastoral systems, and we also understand that these are very critical for maintaining landscape integrity in terms of the ecological functions of these landscapes, but also ensuring that livestock is actually shielded against the impacts of climate change, because some of these areas where we keep our livestock are actually suffering the greatest impacts of climate change with a lot of heat. And we need to appreciate that agroforestry, beyond being looked at it in terms of producing food, producing maybe soil amendments, I think it has a big impact on even just shedding the agriculture systems, including livestock here. But let me just flip again and comment on the issue of agroecology movements and what is happening across Africa. One of the things I need to say is that this movement has been CSO-led, and this movement has, in some cases, has left out our researchers, and this movement, in some cases, has even left out governments. And that tells us that as philanthropy, those of us now in the philanthropy world, what are we going to do? Because if we leave this movement mostly just to the CSOs, key issues are not going to scale. The private sector that we now see is a private sector that the CSOs are creating. It is not the private sector that has been. And I think there is a bigger opportunity if we actually courageously get into the space of the what we are calling conventional private sector and starting to see, since they already have structures and infrastructure to support the input-output system, how do we work with them to ensure that they develop pathways for agroecology products in terms of inputs and outputs? But if we are stuck in looking at this movement and ensuring that we are together with those who actually do things our way, we might actually lose out, because the movement of friends might not actually scale the type of practices that we are looking for. So as organizations now starting to convene the various actors to be part of the movement, let us be courageous enough to walk into spaces that are not our spaces. And I would like to say that today, I'm not in Dakar for the food summit for bigger reasons, but what I'm excited about is that we are seeing agroecology actors now in that food forum. I remember when I started talking about agroecology within the Africa Food Forum, someone told me, you're preaching within a mosque. We don't think they will even listen. But we have seen that as the Africa Food Forum, which is said to be agro-led, has created space for agroecology and agrobiodiversity issues to be talked about. So this is the courage that we are looking for, getting into the spaces you think are not your spaces, so that we create the required change. And even from a philanthropy perspective, the issue of having grouping as agroecology friendly philanthropies alone might not be enough. We need to see how we open the space for more philanthropies, more funders who are even known to be conventional, so that we explain why they need to take up these agroecology approaches. So that is what I just wanted to say. We need to be courageous. We need to invite into our spaces those whom we have believed maybe don't belong to our side, so that we actually scale agroecology work. Or else, I also believe money from philanthropy alone will not be enough. We need to unlock public and private finance, and it takes more of a bold and courageous move rather than sticking to our friends in doing this. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nancy. As ever, a very powerful and insightful speaker. And I like your ideas, which might seem revolutionary amongst revolutionaries, is that we maybe do need to involve ourselves in spaces that are not our home spaces, spaces that we are not comfortable in, and be able to meet with people that otherwise we might consider to be adversaries or opponents, and bring them into conversation so that these transitions can become more inclusive and are less polarized. And I also think what you're saying applies specifically to academics. I think as academics, we like to be in the safe space of our universities and our lecture halls. And I think that there are exceptions, such as one of the universities in Ghana, where one of our colleagues, Professor Dito, also works with University of Development Studies that has a direct approach of engaging with communities. And I think that puts researchers into uncomfortable spaces, but those are often the spaces where we learn most and which are also most transformative to us. And I think that that applies to all of what you are pointing towards in terms of this movement and the need to influence narratives more broadly, and rather than polarizing, creating alliances, and to also leverage public and private sector finance to support this transition. I think that's a really excellent and important point that you've made. So thank you for that. And I'm also really pleased that today's panelists, we have got such a strong representation of women, powerful, insightful women. And so I'd like to invite another insightful, powerful woman, Salome Owanda, to continue and offer her reflections. Oh, you're muted, Salome.
Sorry about that. I hope you're able to hear me now.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Florian. It has been great listening to the presentations by the publishers and the fellow advisory committee members. And let me thank the collective for giving me this opportunity to be here and also speak about the briefs as documents that are helping us to work towards food systems transformation in Africa that is Africa-led and also evidence-based. Because most of the time we talk about where's the evidence for us to be able to make the evidence-based policy actions, but also practical and programming of food systems transformation. So that is that makes these briefs very, very important in this work. And I will talk about the policy brief or the brief on the transition to sustainable, resilient, and equitable fisheries and aquaculture that was presented by Maureen. And I speak on around 4 to 5 issues on the brief, while I reflect on also the question that was made by Malik during his presentation. One of the things that come out of the brief is the triple burden of malnutrition. It's something that is more of a crisis in Africa today. We're talking about undernutrition, we're talking about micronutrient deficiencies, and we're also talking about overnutrition in some parts of Africa. That is something that we cannot just sweep under the carpets, but it's something that we have to address. And I'm looking forward to projects and programmings by various stakeholders and supported by the philanthropies that look at the 3 areas or the 3 issues and how they're interconnected and how they can be better addressed in the food systems transformation in Africa. But also looking at the issues of equity and gender dimensions, especially among the fisher communities. And usually, and most of the times, if you've been engaged with the fisher communities, you've been around the oceans and the lakes, you'll find that the women are usually not involved in deep sea fishing. Most of the times, they wait for the male fishers to go deep into the waters, bring the fish for them to be able to sell. And sometimes it ends up with a lot of dependency by the women not being able to do the work of fishing. Most of the time it's because it's been normalized that they cannot do that. Some of the times it's because of the culture that does not allow that. And unfortunately, sometimes it's also because of the policy and initiatives that do not support or do not think of including women and thinking that they can also be fishers going into the waters. And this is something that we can also rethink as we think or develop initiatives. Because we have, as Africa's Center for Sustainable and Inclusive Development, we have a project that we are co-implementing in Zanzibar on women taking leadership on climate adaptation and natural resource management. And when we're doing the baseline survey or a study on when we're starting the implementation of the project, we realized that the women themselves were saying they now go inside the waters to fish. So when we were starting the project, we were thinking of women as people who are just collecting the ocean products that are closer to the shorelines and waiting for the men to go deep into fishing and bringing for them the fish that they need. But when we started the engagement with the women, we realized that some of the women, and with time, most of the women are getting into this process of themselves going deep into the water, and some of them even diving deep down into the waters to get the fish themselves. So this is something that we can consider as we continue our engagement, and I call on the philanthropists to also consider this. The other thing that I also want to speak about is the issue of the indigenous knowledge in the policy brief, and the role of closure of the lake or the oceans at some point. We realized that in our engagement as Africa Center for Sustainable and Inclusive Development, we realized that it is an important indigenous knowledge that is being implemented today and really appreciated by the communities themselves. However, you find that sometimes, maybe because of economic situation, the dwindling natural resources, people do not want to take this initiative or this knowledge and go against the regulations on closure of the oceans or of the lakes. And sometimes it's because we do not understand the role that this really plays on the indigenous knowledge level. So we have spoken with the communities that can be able to really explain this information and knowledge, and what time of the year and which months this is necessary. So this also calls for our philanthropists and various people that work on development of initiatives on food systems transformation to look at ways of integrating and upscaling the indigenous knowledge into also the modern science that we have. I want to speak lastly on post-harvest losses. I know my time is almost over. And the issue of 30% spoilage rate is very high. I would call upon the philanthropists and various people across the food systems transformation stakeholders to look at the subsidies on solar powered storage for the fisher communities. And this also calls onto the governments or on de-risking the investment process. Because as philanthropists, they would be interested in implementing these processes, investing in the processes. But if the government has not done the de-risking, especially in places where we have conflicts that are currently becoming more and more prone within the fisher communities, it becomes difficult to implement these investments, whereby you will implement today and then tomorrow you find that there was conflict and everything is already spoiled or people stole them. So there's also the role of government in de-risking and making the project and investment and community ready to accept and upscale the investments by the philanthropist. And as I finalize, I just want to say that these briefs are not just documents for us to go through and get the data, but they are documents that are also going to inform decisions on whether families are going to eat. They're going to make decisions on whether our youth are going to migrate to urban areas or to other countries, or even back to the villages, and whether the women are going to be able to provide livelihoods for their communities. These briefs are about providing dignity to our communities. They're about ensuring justice in our actions, and they're about ensuring climate resilience within the community levels. Thank you very much, Florian. I'll end up at that point because of time. Thank you.
Thanks, Salome. I always appreciate how you bring attention back to the gender dimension. You've consistently ensured that we keep that high on the agenda. And I think that's really valuable and important. And also appreciate how you've really brought home the importance of what these briefs are pointing towards, that we are talking about people's livelihoods, we're talking about people's well-being, the future of children, not even children that have been born yet in many cases, children that are still in the womb and whose entire future will depend on the nutritional well-being of their mothers and of their communities. And so the struggle for agroecological transitions is not simply a theoretical exercise or an ideological one, but it has really tangible real-world consequences. And I think that the kind of work that you do and that other members of our advisory committee are doing, as well as obviously our researchers, will be very important in perhaps shifting the policy focus and in providing the types of resources in a catalytic way. In other words, in a very, very targeted and precise way that might help to shift the trajectory of food systems across Africa. So thank you for your contributions and your reflections, Salome. It's much appreciated. With that, I don't think Andrew is here still to offer us a reflection. Andrew, if you are there, raise your voice. I think you dropped off. Yeah, I'm going to hand back to Malik for some closing remarks, perhaps. And I think we've only got like 5 or 6 minutes left from our allotted time, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to engage with the plenary conversation. But Malik, over to you.
Thanks very much, Frank. Thanks to the advisory committee for their reflections. I think, the intention of at least this life cycle of the African Food Systems Transformation Collective is to find what is the catalytic role for philanthropic financing grants to make this transition towards agroecology and food sovereign food systems happen, and to make them just and equitable. I think the one thing I'd like us all to reflect on is whether you think the speakers have done so from your experiences of engaging with food system transformations, the ways that you do. Yeah, I've also seen, thank you for those who raised questions in the Q&A box. I think with the 5 minutes that we have allotted, we could allow 1-2 questions. But if there aren't any, then I will start to wrap up and make closing remarks. So let's see if there's any hands raised in the next few seconds. Going once, twice. So, all right. Well, thank you very much again, everyone. Please note that this is the third of our webinar series. We are doing another one on our final round of issue briefs, so keep an eye on your inboxes from us for the invitations to that. Following that, we'll do one on our synthesis report, which attempts to bring all 19 issue briefs under one common framework that we are advising philanthropy to follow in their financing. Yeah, I think with that, we can close off here. Thank you, Flo, for your co-facilitation. Thank you to our speakers for the great presentations. Thank you to our advisory committee for the reflections, and thank you to our attendees for sticking with us through this, and we hope to see you at the next one. Have a good day all.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you
colleagues.
all.